Have you ever thought about what it would be like running your own business, and then suddenly you have a tax officer just showing up ready to arrest you? Like they didn't even need a reason or anything.
Yeah.
It's like something out of a crazy Bollywood movie.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. The Supreme Court actually just made a huge decision, in this case, Radhika Agarwal v. Union of India, and it's going to change a lot in the world of taxes.
Really. So before this ruling, were things just completely out of control?
I wouldn't say completely out of control, but there were definitely some things that needed fixing when it came to balancing the power that tax authorities have with the rights of individuals. You see, before this ruling, tax officers had a ton of freedom when it came to arresting people. They could pretty much detain anyone just because they were suspicious. They didn't even need solid proof or anything.
Wow, that's kind of scary. I mean, getting arrested is a really serious thing. Shouldn't there be more to it than just a hunch or something?
You're absolutely right. And that's exactly the issue that the Supreme Court tackled. They basically said, look, tax officers aren't above the law. They have to follow the same rules as regular police officers. They even brought up another case, the Kejriwal case, where there were similar problems with officers overstepping their boundaries.
So they're putting a stop to those officers acting like super cops and saying, hey, you have to follow the rules just like everyone else.
Exactly. The Supreme Court made a clear connection to something called the Code of Criminal Procedure, or CRPC. This is like the rule book for law enforcement in India. It lays out very specific rules for when and how arrests can be made.
So no more of that off to jail and we'll sort it out later kind of approach.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
The court was super clear. They established 3 very specific rules that tax officers now have to follow before they can arrest someone.
3 rules, huh? Sounds like they're trying to make things fair. So what's the first rule?
All right, rule number 1. Proof is everything. Tax officers can't just arrest someone based on a feeling or because they just don't like the look of them. They need actual hard evidence to justify an arrest. We're talking about real proof things that can hold up in court, like documents, financial records, or witness statements.
Okay, so they can't just go around arresting people based on vibes. Got it. What about rule number 2?
Rule number 2 is all about transparency and accountability. Tax officers can't just get away with saying we have our reasons and expect everyone to believe them. Nope. They have to write down the reasons for the arrest.
So no more hiding behind vague accusations, huh? That's a big step towards protecting people from being detained for no good reason.
Exactly. It forces them to be transparent. There's now a paper trail that shows why someone was arrested. And this gives people a way to fight back against an arrest and make sure their rights are protected.
This is already sounding much more balanced.
Yeah.
So tell me, what's the last rule?
The third rule is all about communication. You have the right to know why you're being arrested. It's simple. The officer who's arresting you has to tell you exactly what you're being accused of and what the legal reason is for your detention.
So no more being kept in the dark. It's like Miranda rights, but for taxes. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an accountant.
It's not exactly Miranda rights, but it's definitely about making sure that people understand the charges against them and what options they have. They can't just be taken away to jail without a clear explanation. Yeah. It's really about giving people a fair chance to defend themselves. So now they understand the charges and can build a solid defense.
These new rules seem like a pretty good balance. But what happens in those situations where an arrest might be necessary even without a warrant? Like if someone's caught right in the act smuggling something or trying to avoid a huge tax bill?
That's where we have to understand the difference between cognizable and non-cognizable offenses.
Hold on, legal jargon alert. Can you explain those terms in a way that normal people can understand?
Of course, cognizable offenses are basically the serious crimes, where the police, or in this case tax officers, can arrest someone without needing a warrant. Things like smuggling illegal stuff, or really big tax evasion like dodging customs duty over 50 lakh. That's when they can act right away.
So if someone's caught doing some serious smuggling or clearly trying to cheat the system, they can step in immediately. Makes sense. But what about those situations that aren't as severe, like smaller tax issues?
Well, for non-cognizable offenses, which aren't as serious, a warrant is absolutely required. They can't just show up and arrest someone without getting permission from a magistrate first.
So it's all about making sure there are checks and balances in place.
Got it. Got it.
But even in those cases where a warrantless arrest is allowed, it shouldn't be the automatic go-to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court made it very clear that even with cognizable offenses, arrest should be the last option, not the first thing they try. They emphasize that the response needs to fit the situation.
I like that the response needs to fit the situation. It's like you don't need a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But what about those stories you hear about tax officers using the threat of arrest to force people into paying taxes that are in dispute? You know, that whole pay up or we'll arrest you tactic.
That's what people often call tax terrorism, and the Supreme Court strongly condemned it.
It's just plain wrong. It's like holding someone's finances hostage and forcing them to pay. What did the court actually say about that?
They were crystal clear that this kind of practice is totally illegal. They emphasize that individuals have rights, and those rights can't be ignored just because someone works for the tax department. If an officer tries to force you to pay by threatening to arrest you, you have every right to challenge them.
So there are consequences if officers abuse their power. That's good to know. But how do we prevent this from happening in the first place? Is there any way to guarantee that tax officers are acting within the law?
That's where the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, or CBIC, comes in. The Supreme Court told the CBIC to create clear guidelines for tax officers. These guidelines are designed to stop them from abusing their power again. They're all about making sure officers understand what they can and can't do when it comes to arrests.
So like a two-pronged approach, laying down the law and setting clear expectations. But what does this landmark ruling actually mean for everyday people running a business or dealing with taxes? Is this a reason to celebrate, or should we still be cautious?
It's definitely a huge win for individual rights and a big step towards a fairer, more transparent tax system. It offers much needed protection from being arrested without justification. And it gives people the power to stand up for themselves if they feel they're being treated unfairly.
So are we finally moving away from that guilty until proven innocent vibe?
Absolutely. Now the focus is on due process, presenting evidence, and respecting individual rights. It's like shifting from a system based on fear and intimidation to one that prioritizes fairness and the rule of law.
It feels like the Wild West days of tax enforcement are coming to an end. No more of that shoot first and ask questions later attitude. But I do wonder, will this ruling actually change the way tax officers operate in real life? Or is it just a bunch of legal words that won't have any real impact on the ground?
That's the big question. The effectiveness of any ruling really depends on how well it's implemented and enforced. The CBIC has a really important role to play here. They need to train officers, monitor their behavior, and take action if there are any violations.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. But what about those who might have been unjustly arrested in the past? Do they have any options under this new ruling? Could this open the door for appeals or even compensation?
That's a great question, and it's something that legal experts are likely to debate for a while. This ruling has the potential to reshape how tax-related legal challenges are handled. It could give individuals who believe they were wrongfully arrested a new way to seek justice.
So it sounds like we're moving into a whole new era of taxpayer rights. It's like a brand new chapter in the relationship between taxpayers and the tax authorities, hopefully one that's built on respect and fairness.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's a definite shift towards a system that's more balanced and equitable.
But I'm also curious about something. This ruling specifically focuses on arrests, right? Does it have any impact on how tax disputes are handled in general, or how people can challenge tax demands?
That's a really good question. And while the ruling is directly about arrests, it does indirectly affect the whole process of tax disputes. This emphasis on evidence transparency and due process sets a precedent that could change how tax officers approach disputes and investigations.
So it's like a ripple effect that raises the bar for fairness across the entire system.
Exactly. Taxpayers now have a stronger foundation if they want to challenge tax demands that are unfair or arbitrary. This ruling might even encourage a more cooperative approach to resolving tax disputes instead of it always being so adversarial.
It seems like this ruling is about more than just preventing arrests that shouldn't happen. It's about building a culture of respect for taxpayer rights within the entire tax system.
Absolutely. It's about ensuring that tax authorities aren't just going by the book, but also acting ethically and with integrity. It's about creating a system where taxpayers feel confident that their rights will be protected.
This makes me think about something. We've talked about the CBIC's role in setting guidelines and making sure these changes actually happen. But what about the human factor? How do we make sure individual tax officers really embrace these principles of fairness and act accordingly?
That's where training and education are crucial. The CBIC needs to do more than just issue guidelines. They need to invest in solid training programs that emphasize ethical conduct, communication skills, and a thorough understanding of taxpayer rights. It's about shifting the mindset from just enforcing the rules to prioritizing fairness and collaboration.
So it's about creating a real culture change within these organizations. It's about moving away from that us versus them mentality and recognizing that both sides, tax authorities and taxpayers, benefit from a tax system that's fair and efficient.
Exactly. When tax authorities treat taxpayers with respect and fairness, it builds trust and encourages people to willingly comply with the rules. It's a win-win for everyone involved.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. We started with this dramatic image of a tax officer making an arrest out of nowhere and ended up with a much deeper understanding of the legal protections for individuals, the importance of due process, and the possibility of a more balanced relationship between taxpayers and the tax authorities.
It's a good reminder that even in a complex and sometimes intimidating system like taxation, individuals have rights, and those rights deserve to be respected.
We've covered so much today, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore when it comes to tax policy, individual rights, and how power is balanced within these systems.
It's definitely an area that's constantly changing, and this Supreme Court ruling is a huge step forward. It's something that we should all be paying attention to and keep discussing.
We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable knowledge, sparked your curiosity, and maybe even inspired you to ask some tough questions about the systems that affect our lives. Keep learning, keep exploring, and as always, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.